Hey everybody, this is music lawyer Ryan Schmidt. I'm so excited this week to be joined by Sean Grand of adjacent.la. Sean, thank you so much for being here.
Hey Ryan, how you doing, man? Thank you so much for having me on your platform. I really have been admiring the work that you do and consuming a lot of information that you're putting down in your content. So excited to be here today and talk about a couple things with you.
I can't wait. Well, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody how you got into this world of music management?
Yeah, sure. Based here in downtown Los Angeles, been managing both on the artist and producer side for 6, 7 years now. I work with the producer Zaro Vega day to day on everything pertaining to his career. Whether that's marketing, branding, content, through to other aspects of opportunities, publishing. The whole kind of gamut. So it's something I'm really passionate about. I got into the space after working a pretty hefty business career and going through kind of like a pretty rigorous education, getting my MBA in business as well.
Amazing. So I know most people, when they get into music, there's always some story. It's either they were an artist and they've always loved music, or they had a cousin who was an artist and they decided to be their manager. What was that first entry point for you in the music business?
Yeah, it's kind of similar in that sense. Growing up, me and all my friends, made music, and some of us kind of continued with it more kind of on the production side or on the rapping side specifically. Some talented folks in the group. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of didn't realize that exactly until I'd left. I'd gone to college and kind of saw what they did. I had sort of slowed down that side of myself. But eventually, after working in the corporate world for about 7 years, I had moved from sales into the more creative side of marketing and whatnot, but it just wasn't really enough for me. And I was just kind of honestly looking at life, wondering if, 50 years down the road, I'd been happy with what I had done. And I listen to music like everybody else. I really feel music. It really drives me throughout my day. And I remember being on the train actually from Heathrow into London, listening to some music and just going, why am I not doing this? And so it was in that moment where I kind of sort of decided to take the leap of faith. I moved down to LA in an RV. That was like 6, 7 years ago at this point. Owned and operated a studio downtown for about 4 years. And in the process, started managing and really, kind of found that to be my home.
I love that. It really is such a great journey when you can take that leap of faith and take it to where you've taken it. Is it fair to say that you work mostly with producers? Do you work with producers and artists?
Yeah, at this point, really just working exclusively with Zaro Vega. He's a multi-genre record producer. He's got about 200 songs out in his catalog, working with different artists. Some of them, are his as well. But I've really found that it's a good niche for me. I think that there are different types of managers. I think that, every artist or producer, based on where they're at in their career, has somewhat similar but differing needs. And I think that managers also have their strengths. So I've just kind of found that working with producers really allows me to leverage my strengths, and I really enjoy it.
Well, I primarily work with artists. And, in that world, the artist's most common need is record deals, right? But on the producer side, with the exception of like an artist producer deal that might come through a label, my understanding is that a publishing deal or the publishing side of it is just that much more important for the producer. I would love to get your thoughts on how that plays a role.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you, Ryan. I think that it's something that's to some degree understated, especially within, kind of the independent community. It's confusing, but it really is the foundation of what the producer should be building. And this is something that I also learned through experience, working as a manager. I think a lot of times producers are, especially in this market, so focused on kind of getting that upfront fee, so many leases per month, let's say, or even if they're doing exclusives, getting that producer fee, and really just kind of like in a lot of cases paying the rent, or paying their overhead for that given month, hopefully saving, hopefully growing to be in bigger studios, working with bigger artists, bigger budgets, labels, etc. But a lot of times I think at the independent level, that's a long grind to get there. let's be honest. I mean, this industry as a whole, whether you're artist or producer, lawyer, manager, it's not for the faint of heart. So I think it's really important for producers to be building the value of their catalog, and you do that by focusing on publishing, not just focusing on kind of leases by way of just getting your fees and kind of calling it a day.
I completely agree. I think that one of the biggest challenges with publishing for any musicians, whether you're a songwriter, producer, an artist, is first knowing that publishing exists. That it's something in addition to what you might see on DistroKid and your distributor or your record label. There's so many times where somebody's reached out to me and they said, hey, I produced a song 10, 15 years ago, and I never got royalties on that. I was wondering if you could help me go back and collect those. It's like,
right.
It's the sad part about this business is that time is not your friend.
No.
You wait long enough, you've lost the statute of limitations for a court case, and you've lost the right to collect royalties because it went into the black box and it's never going to be found again. So I really admire, that advice that publishing is really something that you have to prioritize, especially on the producer side.
Absolutely. I love hearing your perspective as the lawyer as well.
It's so important. I've seen publishing deals that have fallen apart because these songs weren't registered properly. There's plenty of good placements either on the artist side or the producer side, but they were never registered and money just slipped through the crack. I recently spoke with Jacob Paul from Cosign and Cobalt a couple weeks ago, and he likened it to publishing as kind of like a leaky balloon. Right? Like when that song comes out and money's being generated, that balloon is full, but it's got a little tiny hole in it. And over time, it's going to slowly deflate until there's nothing left.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I think it really behooves the artist and the producer to educate themselves on, different types of royalties, what generates them, and how to collect them. Once you kind of get that diagram down, I would say it's not that complicated. You've got to know how to then register everything. And if you can get an admin to pick you up, then I think there's a lot of value in doing that, getting everything nicely organized, and in my opinion, setting yourself up then, for a publishing deal in the future. That's what we're doing. That's part of the playbook that we've kind of figured out. So I'm glad that it aligns with what you and the gentleman from Cosign were talking about.
I'm really curious about this and your perspective. There's so many different beat stores and marketplaces online for artists to find beats. I'd love to get your thoughts on what that does for the producer and also kind of the different eras that we've seen because of that.
In the time that I've been working in the industry, type beats have been a thing. I think back to the eras of different super producers, these type of producers that built just a really tremendous brand and sound specifically, hear that, it's them. And I think that's a lot of, not to say that doesn't exist anymore, but I think the type beat kind of movement and everything, it's, naturally it's repeating kind of a particular sound that the artist is looking for, and I get that. You want to hop on that, that's cool. But I think that there's a level of to some extent, maybe some originality that perhaps is being stripped out of that. And with that, then, a lot of, maybe it's even easier, maybe there's formulas, almost that are being created around particular sounds. So they're being, made really quickly, and they're also being sold really inexpensively, and so over time, you're kind of commoditizing production, bringing down the value of it. And I think that's an issue.
I would imagine if you're hopping on somebody else's sound, whether it's an artist or a producer, and you're spitting these things out, that makes it really hard for you to get known for your own style and your own signature sound.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there.
And, another thing with the type beats, I think of it from a legal side. You go on to BeatStars, and I love those guys. I'm not trashing them at all. But from a legal side, I go into BeatStars, and I could type in La Russell type beat, right? And there's a picture of him and there's his name and it's a type beat. My mind automatically goes to a few different things. One, copyright. You are literally creating something with the intention of it sounding substantially similar to the source beat. So you're getting into some copyright infringement like territory. This is something that could potentially be too similar. The other thing is using the name and the image and all that. This is like he's got a right of publicity for his name, image, and likeness, and you are trading on his goodwill and his name to sell your beats. And he should be the one that monetizes on that. So I think about these things. I know that it's very unlikely for anybody to make a legal case for that, but they certainly could.
Yeah, I always love your perspective on things. I think that you tend to go, really into the law and break things down in a simple way that people can understand and get them to think. So I appreciate it from my perspective. I think that sometimes that's a difficult thing for managers to do when it comes to conveying why X, Y, or Z, are important for an artist or producer to consider.
No, thanks, man.
Yeah.
One thing that we talked about this conversation we had earlier about Timbaland, and there was this quote, and I think I saw it on like a No Labels Necessary clip, but it was a quote about how he used to get anywhere from $300K to $600K per beat, like in the heyday. And one of the interviewers was like, well, what happened? And he said, what happened is you young guys, started taking less money. You started doing things for favors and for exposure and all these other things. And that devalued the music and the value of these custom beats. And now we're in a place where whether it's like streaming payouts or beats or, what producer fees should be, it seems like we're really racing to the bottom, that people kind of assume that music shouldn't have any inherent value. Like it should just be something that we all get for free.
Yeah, it's sort of like we're competing on price instead of creativity, network, or, long-term rights.
Yeah. And what do you think that does for the industry as a whole over time?
I think that it strips creativity, and originality more than anything. And I think that for me, honestly, when I look at hip hop, I think that that's caused some degradation compared to kind of like the roots of it. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's people that disagree. Maybe that's just how they like to produce, and if that's fun, then at the same time, that's great because that's music and music is supposed to be fun. But from my perspective, I think that we lack a lot of original sound these days. And I would love to see more of that.
And I'm even seeing this in the sync music world, where 10, 15 years ago, a major advertiser, a major brand doing a car commercial, they might be paying $100,000 for a 30-second TV spot. Now they're paying $25,000. Ad budgets have only gone up. It's only more expensive to sell the cars. The car prices have gone up. Everything's gone up except for the creative part of it. And I've looked at this. I've seen some of these deals and I've talked to these artists, these songwriters, these producers. And it seems like there's this mentality that, well, if I don't take this, somebody else will. And I should just kind of be grateful for this lower fee because I'm just paying my dues and, this is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one to always answer because when you are doing something for exposure, or let's say you're giving up a piece of your publishing, maybe not all of it, for an opportunity with a legitimately big artist, and you're actually connected with them, and their team, then that can bring about additional opportunities through the relationship side of it. But equally, is more my go-to. It's important to be firm about the publishing that you are owed. It's based on the elements of the music that you are bringing to the table, and therefore you are the proper owner of that. What someone is paying you as far as a fee shouldn't come at the cost of you getting your publishing. I think there's some misnomers around that at the same time, and just again, more education is needed.
That's a great point. I'd like to dig into that a little bit deeper. What do you think is the standard or the right way for a producer to get compensated on a track?
There's different ways to do it, whether you're working with an independent artist, let's say, or you're working with, a major record label. The record label typically is going to have a larger budget. I think a lot of people typically get paid more. And so I think there's some element of sacrifice that gets made working with people in the independent space, but you can also structure things in a way, as I've been, working more and more with my producer, to collect, on the back end by way of the master. So I think typically, the fee comes, at kind of like the opposition of the master percentage, but not as a percentage of what you are owed, on the publishing side of it.
So true. And one thing that I will say on the legal side that's important for producers and their management team to keep in mind when they're negotiating these types of deals with labels and artists is that what that percentage is, and what the points are. And you always hear, well, 3 to 5 points, that's good. And, and that's kind of what people get in their mind. There's a lot of things that come out of like just assuming that standard.
Right.
And one is that like that might work if we're talking about a major label artist and a major label deal.
Yeah.
That probably doesn't work for an independent artist who owns 100% of their rights and doesn't have to pay or split their royalties with the label. I think like if we're talking about a independent artist, that 3 to 5% is like 15 to 25%. And the other thing is like, it depends on how that label is even calculating the royalties, because 3 to 5% of PPD is much different than 3 to 5% of net revenue. And the net revenue can be a lot less because now you're calculating all the expenses of the label. So I think there's a danger when we think about like what is like standard, is people thinking like, oh, I think producers just get 3 to 5 points. Let's just call it that. And it's just how that can be misapplied depending on the situation.
Yeah. I mean, these are excellent points. I love the way you broke it down. These details, I think, are what a lot of people need help with. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between typically 3 to 20%, depending on kind of the size of the artist. I mean, it makes sense to me that if it's a large artist, who's signed to a label, there's money behind the promotion of the records. They've got a large fan base. That percentage is going to be on the lower side. If it's an independent artist, they don't have those things, the record's probably not going to go very far. So you're probably not going to get too much either. As a producer, it makes sense to receive a higher percentage. Doesn't mean you own the master, but you're receiving that percentage of the royalties. And I think there's also confusion around that as well. Because artists are told, that they should own their masters, et cetera and so forth. So it gets complicated when you get into contracts. Not that the contracts don't clearly lay things out, but artists and producers need lawyers, and managers.
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about master ownership. I think that for whatever reason, and we've heard it from artists for years and years, Prince is really the first one that I can think of that talked about the importance of owning your masters. It seems like a lot of artists these days are obsessed with the idea of master ownership, and they think that any type of deal where the label owns the masters is a bad deal. No, it's like a sliding scale. If the label isn't investing a lot of money and they're giving you a higher royalty rate, then that should probably be a licensing deal. But if they're investing a ton of money and they're putting a lot in the front end, it's pretty reasonable that they should expect to own the master copyrights to that. So there's not like a master ownership is always bad or it's always good. You just got to look at each deal and does it make sense for them?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think a lot of it is case by case, situational, and really, reading the terms and conditions.
What do you think a catalog means to a producer long term as far as sustainability in their career?
I think they've got to treat that catalog like a business portfolio, as we've been talking about. That's the biggest kind of long-term asset that they need to be thinking about building in order to eventually kind of get out of the rat race, as I sort of say sometimes. If you're going to make money through music and that upfront fee is what generally speaking is kind of keeping you alive month to month, then it's going to be that big business portfolio or asset that you build that hopefully has hit records in it, and of course everyone's working towards hit records, creating timeless music. That's what ultimately is going to get you paid forever. So it would only make sense that that's what the long-term strategy you should be focusing on, would take into account, because eventually you might not want to produce anymore. You might not be selling beats anymore. So at that point, if you haven't developed a strategy that's going to continue to cash you out, or if you haven't, kind of taken some of that money that you've generated and started to invest in other things, let's say even outside of the music industry, as a lot of people in the industry do who are successful, then you're probably going to stop selling beats for $100 a lease at some point, and the well runs dry. Where are you going to go from there? So a well-managed catalog is your career's real value. And I can't stress that enough.
And what I'll add to that is it's not just a value to you personally. You know, the life of a copyright is your entire life plus 70 years after you die. You're potentially creating generational wealth for you and your family if it's managed correctly. Look at all of these artists and songwriters who have left on these legacies for their families because they managed it the right way. They created these trusts, and they've now left something that is going to generate money for years and years and years.
You know, that's the dream. So why not spend some time up front, educating yourself on how it works, doing it yourself from the beginning, producing as much music as you can, releasing as much music as you can, and hopefully partnering with additional entities that help you to kind of not only stay organized, but generate more opportunities going forward.
You mentioned one word that I really like there. It was about being educated. And what do you think the value of an educated producer is in today's music industry?
I think it separates you from, you know, a large portion of the creatives out there. I think that there's a lot of really talented people, and I think that there's a huge opportunity for extremely creative people to educate themselves on the business side of it. I think that that's what separates the ones oftentimes that make it from those who kind of peter off or just don't kind of get anywhere. And I hate to generalize like that, you know, but from what I've seen, and this is why I love working with my client Zaro Vega, is that education is a really defining factor, as is, you know, internal motivation, organization, these sort of logical aspects of thinking that can go really well hand in hand with the creative side of what you're doing.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that there are better outcomes for all musicians when they take control of their careers and they invest in their own self-education. I mean, if you pass it off to your label, your manager, your publisher, everything might be fine. But also you hear all these horror stories of, you know, an artist trusted their business manager implicitly and all this terrible stuff happened. Like you have better outcomes when you know what's going on, especially from the legal side. I think understanding the intellectual property that's created and how to confirm who owns what. I was just working on a music catalog sale where this artist had been working with a bunch of different producers, and this private equity company was really excited to buy a bunch of his masters. But he didn't have any contracts with a bunch of his collaborators. And we had to go back and we had to kind of do all the paperwork that he should have done 5-10 years ago. Yeah. And some of them kind of figured out what was going on. And because there was no agreement, they were like, yeah, I want you to cut me in on that. And I want a bigger chunk and I want this and that. None of that would have necessarily happened if there was an agreement that was created right when the song was made. But now they see the opportunity and they're capitalizing on that. So I always say, like, an educated artist thinks about the copyrights that are created both on the publishing side and on the master side, and for every single song can tell you who owns what and who's collecting on what.
I think it goes back to what you had said in the beginning about time. Time is a huge factor here too, because in your example, that individual would have had a better agreement or set of agreements in place with those people had they been timely about it, you know, from the beginning. So couldn't agree more, man. Producer agreements are key, you know, split sheets are key. It gets messy. It's hard to track those people down later. In some cases, signatures aren't always the easiest to get. So staying on top of it from the start is definitely the way to go.
One last thing, when people rely on like verbal agreements or handshake agreements, they can be enforceable. But the biggest issue is that there is no written record of what actually happened and what you agreed to. And people lie, you know? So you sue somebody and you say, they told me this, and they go up on the stand and the judge says, did you say this? No, I didn't say that. Or I don't remember saying that. And now guess what? It might as well have never happened. So I always like to have these written agreements. And if for whatever reason you don't have a written agreement, as a fallback, get that confirmed in an email with your collaborators. Hey, worked on the song today, really enjoyed that. Let's say we'll split the master and the publishing 50-50. How does that sound with you? Yes, that works great for me. That's evidence of an agreement. But when you have nothing and you just say, yeah, we just we just always split things and we just like shook on it, you're really buying yourself a future lawsuit.
Yeah, things like that have happened to me in business, and sometimes you learn the hard way, but definitely always a clear paper trail at a minimum, leading up to a contract is the way to go.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Sean, this has been such a fun, great conversation. I would love for people to learn more about where they can learn more about you, Sean, and where they can learn more about adjacent.la.
Absolutely. And really appreciate you, Ryan, for having me, for making the time. You can learn more about me on my Instagram profile at Sean Grand Forever. And you can learn more about my management company, adjacent.la, at adjacent.la. You'll find us online as well at adjacent.la.
Amazing. Sean, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. Catch us next Thursday. We'll be talking about some other part of the music business, whether it's copyright, royalties, everything you need to know to level up and toughen up in this music business.